Okay, well, thank you for having us. We always enjoy coming here, and this is actually my last budget presentation ever, so I'm kind of excited about that. No. I will not serve, no. Okay. Well, the proposed budget for next year is up roughly $1.8 million. It's 5.5%, and we know that's a big increase. But the board's worked really hard to be fiscally responsible, and there's a couple of big things that are driving this budget, which I'll get into in a minute. But what I'd like you to do, just to set a bit of a context, is I made this informational packet for you. And just to give you a sense of kind of the position the board was in, if you look at the first page, and I actually have a couple of extras. On the first page is the per pupil expenditures for the past year in York County. And if you look, when it comes to elementary expenditures, we're third from the bottom. And when it comes to secondary expenditures, that's 9 through 12, we're next to last from the bottom. And if you turn to the second page, this is a listing of positions we've added and cut in the last several years. We've cut 89 positions, we've added 23. And there's a net loss of 66 positions. And in that same time span, we've lost 130 pupils, which is roughly 4 or 5 teachers' worth. So most of these lost positions are due to the fact that we've really been trying to tighten up, be as efficient and conservative as we can, and still provide a sound education for the kids of the district. So that's a way of using some numbers to say we've gone about as low as we can get. And so when the board was looking at where they could cut and then putting out a budget to our voters that they felt was educationally sound, you have the budget that's in front of you. So there are 4 new positions in the budget. 2 are for the Hussey School. It's for a kindergarten position and a 3rd grade position. Because Berwick is our only town that is experiencing significant growth, which I'll talk more about a little bit later. We cut in this budget the equivalent of 4 teaching positions and 4 ed tech positions, so there's a loss of 8. We've cut freshman athletics. We're purchasing no new buses, and we're doing fairly minimal repairs to the buildings. So we've gotten to a point of this is about as low as we can go without really impacting kids. And so the board is putting this out to the voters, and then they'll decide where they want us to go from there. So just briefly going through some of the highlights of the budget, we have 11 functions. Those are the 11 functions that will be voted on May 17th, 6:30 at the Noble High School gym. Regular instruction is actually a decrease, and that is basically where most of our classroom teachers are allocated, and it basically reflects some of the positions that we've cut. Our second function is special education, and that is one of the big drivers. It's up $565,000. And as you know, special ed is a federally mandated program, and it's based on the educational needs of kids, and we don't necessarily have a ton of say in that. Our out-of-district tuition placement is up quite a bit. We're actually going over budget now because we've just had kids who've moved in that have wound up in out-of-district placements, and we're just basically having to eat that right now. And there are 2 new special ed teaching positions for kids with autism. And I don't know if you've ever watched the news, but autism is nationwide is just growing like crazy. And now they're saying 1 out of every 88 kids is diagnosed with autism. So special ed is one of the big drivers in terms of the budget. Career and technical ed is relatively small, a $9,000 increase. When it comes to other instruction and summer school and extracurricular, that's a decrease, in large part because we took out freshman sports. Student and staff support is up. In large part, we moved copier leases there. It's basically just kind of a bookkeeping move, and we are adding a half a nurse at the high school, and reflecting in part because we're moving the 8th grade there. System administration is up, partly because, and I am not complaining, just so you understand, but I'm either the lowest paid or next lowest paid superintendent in York County, which has been fine with me, but the board thought to attract a quality candidate to replace me, they might want to increase that sum. So that's part of what is in there. When it comes to school administration, if you look on the third line, you'll see a half an assistant principal. That person has been at the Hussey School, and the plan with the district restructuring is we're going to have the Hussey principal and the assistant principal basically supervise both the Knowlton School and the Hussey School. And so the other half of the assistant principal at Hussey has actually been in regular instruction because it's been a half-time teacher. We're making it a full-time administrator. The salary change is negligible. It simply means that the entire salary's in this function and not in regular instruction. So that's a large part of the increase. Transportation, it's up $756,000. A significant part of that basically is two things. One is last year we took out roughly half of our teacher salaries and paid them out of the last of our federal jobs money, which we're losing for next year. So that's a $565,000 swing that was not in the budget because we paid them out of federal funds that is now coming back into the budget because they're going to need to be paid locally. So a large part of this increase is basically the loss of $565,000 in federal money. The other part, we alluded to the fact that special education has gone up significantly. And just to call your attention to this, because the board was pretty astounded when we actually collected the numbers. If you go to the next page in that packet I gave you, there's information on the miles that we run. At the top of the page are the schools that we go to for out-of-district placements. And then we list our daily mileage. And for our 6 through 12 runs, that's getting kids to the Knowlton School, the middle school, and the high school, we go 871 miles a day. For all our K-5 kids to get to the elementary schools, we go 668 miles. For our in-district special education runs, which is getting kids to programs that may not be in their home school but are within the district, it's those little yellow minibuses you see on the roads, we go 518 miles a day. And to go to out-of-district placements, we go 1,215 miles a day. And when you add those numbers up, we go as many miles a day to take a relatively few number of special needs students around the district or out of the district than we do to transport all the other kids. It's the same amount of miles. And just to underscore that fact, right at the bottom of the page, in 2006 we had 23 6 through 12 runs. We've consolidated runs and tried to get more efficient. We now have 19. In 2006, we had 22 K-5 runs. We now have 16. And in 2006, we had 11 special ed runs. We now have 22. So while we've gotten more efficient in terms of getting most of the kids to school on our regular runs, our special education runs have basically doubled. And that's driving our transportation costs. And the next page is just a map on all the places we go to. In facilities, we're up about 199,000. That's an increase in contracted services, which are our HVAC, pest management, snow plowing, and those sorts of things. We budgeted an increase in heat because we all know the price of fuel is going up. We're actually sharing our facilities manager with SAD 35 with Marshwood. He'll still be contracted with us, but we'll get reimbursed half his costs because we're going to share him half-time with Marshwood. We actually do that with our food service director as well. And then other expenditures, there's an $80,000 increase for food service. The past several years we've been unusual in that our program is broken even. Most programs don't because the prices that you can charge for meals is set by the state. So we haven't had to contribute to food service to balance that out. But we've used up their balance in the last couple of years, and we also haven't raised prices for 2 years because we know families are struggling, but we just can't do it anymore. So that's gone up. And debt service is down. The only building we're now still paying on is Noble High School. So if you turn to the next page, that's the calculation for figuring out each town's share. Berwick is the town that is growing the most. You have a larger percentage of our student population. And so your percentage has gone up a point, a percentage. Lebanon's gone down 1.47, and North Berwick's gone up 0.47. And again, referring to this packet, I included a couple of pages from our Hussey School Principal's State of the Schools report that she made this year to the board. The current enrollment at the Hussey School is 541 students. And if you go to the next page, in the 2004-2005 school year, we had 338 students. We've gained 203 students in that building. The North Berwick Primary School has 200 students. We've added basically the equivalent of a school at Hussey. And finally, the last page, we do enrollment projections every year through NESDEC. And if Berwick continues at the pace that it's going, you're projected in terms of student enrollment to grow by 24% by the 2021-22 school year. And the other towns are flat, which means that if the trend continues, Berwick will be responsible for a larger percentage of the district budget. And the budget could go up not a penny, and you will pay more because you just have a larger percentage of it. So, that being the case, the impact to Berwick is about $800,000, and we know that's big. But we think it is a educationally sound budget. If you look at our per pupil costs, we're not spending a lot. And if we've cut a lot of positions already, and if we cut much more, we will impact kids. And if the public feels that, this is a budget they can't support, then we'll take the next step. But we are putting it out there, and we'll see what the public says. So, I'm happy to take questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Manager.
Paul, can you just elaborate a little bit on the process that will be used particularly the difference between the meeting that will be held on the 17th.
Yep.
And then the vote, the validation vote on the 22nd, and what generally happens at the 17th so people can be.
Okay, it's a two-step process. It's either double jeopardy or double elimination, whichever one you want to go with. All right, on the 17th, we will have a budget meeting at Noble High School starting at 6:30 in the gym. Everyone's invited to that. And it operates very much like a town meeting. We'll have a moderator, and the 11 functions that are in the budget, regular ed, and so forth, will be up for debate, and whoever is there can support it, they can amend it, they can cut it, they can add to it. But at the end of the night, we will have a budget that whoever is at the Noble High School gym will decide. That budget then goes out on the 22nd to a referendum vote in all 3 towns, and the polls are open from 8 to 8. So the budget meeting on the 17th will decide the budget. They could adopt this budget in total. They could cut parts of it. They could add to it. And then whatever that budget meeting decides is what will go out to referendum the following week for an up and down vote. Eleanor?
Paul, in going through this, and I'm not an educator and I don't pretend to be one, but I noticed there's a reduction in regular instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Now that, in my simple little mind, is educating children.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I go over here and there's a 6.16% in school administration. Couldn't we do with less administrators and maybe keep our teachers? And I say that's in my little mind that you know, it's the teachers that do the educating, not the administrators.
And I wouldn't argue that. We get asked that all the time. On the one hand, that increase is in large part because the assistant principal position that is in 2 places right now just wound up in administration, so we're not adding any more people. We're just accounting for them slightly differently. And when you look at it, we're talking about in Berwick having a principal and an assistant principal who will be responsible for 550 kids in 2 buildings. So there's not a lot there. In North Berwick, we have 1 principal. In Lebanon, we have a principal and a half-time assistant. At the middle school, we have a principal and an assistant principal. And at the high school, we have a principal and an assistant principal and 2 deans. And actually, when you get down to it, and it's in my packet, we have a printout, which I believe some of you gentlemen actually asked for. It's the 279. It comes from the state. And it actually looks at EPS, which is the funding model that the state uses, and they have recommended levels of staffing. And when you look at this, we actually have less administration than the state will support. And we actually have something on the order of 20 more teachers than the state feels is necessary, because this board believes in trying to maintain decent class sizes. We actually have more nurses than the state says we should. They say we should have 4, because they go simply by 1 nurse for every 800 kids. We have 7 because the board feels strongly that we need a full-time presence in each building, because we have more medically fragile kids, kids on insulin pumps and some of those sorts of things. So actually, if you look at the numbers, we're lighter on administration, and we put more dollars on things that impact kids, like teachers, nurses, and so forth. So I think we do what we're supposed to do.
Okay, another thing too, you said that some of that federal money you got last year, that was stimulus money, wasn't it?
It's the last of it, yeah.
Yeah, and you used it to pay salaries, and that's why, because, you know, $800,000 is a big jump for the town of Berwick.
I know.
And I think you probably remember when I was up there arguing to get it changed, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But, and I'm sure you know as well as I do that if they stuck to the Sinclair Act, it would have been fair.
It depends on your point of view.
It's the waivers that have ruined our education system, in my personal opinion.
Okay.
So, but I just don't know what to say because, you know, another $1.30 on our mill rate, and we still got our town government to run, is a lot of money
I hear
for
you.
this
And,
little
and
town.
maybe this won't fly, but the board is putting out, I mean, as a board, we don't want to be in a position to say, well, kids aren't going to have art, or they're not going to have, whatever it is. We're putting out a budget that we think is educationally sound. They've worked hard to get as low as they felt they could. And if the public doesn't support it, then we'll go to the next step, and whatever the
And-
public does provide, we'll provide the best education we can with the resources we get.
And I understand that. I just am kind of disappointed that it is so high for us because, but as you say, but now, if
If you look at special education,
that's.
$560,000 increase, and that's nothing we can, it just what the kids need. And you look at the increase in transportation because we lost the federal money, that's most of the increase just in those two things.
But now,
And everything
special
else is
ed, does the government pay, remember they came out and said they were gonna pay 40%?
Yeah, they never have.
No, I know, what they paying now? They were paying 14, I don't know if
That's
they.
around there.
It's around that, too. They've never
No.
done what they agreed to do either. I mean, it's good giving orders, but then it comes to paying for orders.
Well, most of your increases here show well above 3%.
Mhm.
And it appears, in general, 3% increase in wages is about all people get, if they get that.
Mhm.
And because, you know, we're talking 5.8%, a 5.48, I should say, for instruction. I'm not against instruction because I was in it for a long time. However, there needs to be a better consideration of the expense that schools are putting on the backs of our taxpayers. You're not alone. We're in the same boat here. The problem I see is if the townspeople reject this budget, what is your next move?
Well, it depends on which scenario comes into play. If at the town meeting, or budget meeting, but I guess I'm using your terminology, whoever is there cuts certain items, and then that reduced budget gets approved at referendum, then we kind of have a guideline because they will have cut a certain function. You know, if they cut the administrative function, then the reduction needs to be in that area. So that'll give the board some direction on where they need to cut. So that's one scenario is we get a reduced budget at the budget meeting, but that reduced budget then does get approved, and that's the budget we'll live with. If this budget gets approved at the budget meeting, or even a reduced one, or even an increased one, but then that goes down in the referendum, we won't necessarily, because it's simply an up or down vote, have any guidance on what areas people wanted to cut. So at that point, I think the board will just have to take a look at the budget, feel where they can make some reductions, maybe get some public input, and kind of go from there. So a little bit depends on which budget either does or doesn't get approved, and whether it's at the budget meeting or whether it's at the referendum. So it kind of depends on how it unfolds.
At the referendum, are you going to have the amount of the whole budget there?
Yeah.
It wasn't last year, was it?
It should have been.
Oh, it
It's
well, it
supposed to get
probably was
posted.
then, okay.
The night of the budget, when it's all said and done, we write down what was adopted in each of those functions, and we get a copy of that to be posted in the polling places the next week.
I'm just a scenario. What would happen if the total package was defeated?
Mhm.
And you went back and let's say they approved 3% increase across the board. That doesn't appear to be doable according to these figures, without a massive change in your operations. You know, and I guess I'm stuck with a 46% increase in transportation is huge.
Mhm.
I understand what you're saying about using federal dollars, but have you ever gone out to bid for, and what do those figures come in at?
Every time we've looked at whether we contract out, it's always more than doing it in-house. You know, our per mile costs are low according to the state. According to the state, we have one of the better fleets, and we're as efficient as we can. Usually doing things in-house is better than contracting out, because there's always some kind of a surcharge to be paid for that. So we do look at those things. We use routing software to design all our routes to be as efficient as we can. The big driver is some of those uncontrollables. If we have a youngster with special needs who needs to go to a program in Portland, then that's what we wind up doing. And that's where the increases have been, and those things won't change. You know, there are so many things that are either mandated or non-discretionary in a budget that what does get hit would be the more discretionary things, like do elementary kids still have art, or the things we don't want to get to unless the public says, yeah, we need to look at that. So.
Could you explain Article 14 a little bit and what happens if you get a cut to that budget?
They have turned this budget down once since 1968.
Yeah. What that is in Maine's funding formula, which is basically EPS, they come up with an amount that they feel is reasonable and that they're willing to support. And in our case, it's about a 58-42 split. But they only go so far. As I alluded to a little while ago, we have somewhat more teaching positions because we believe in decent class sizes than the state will support. So if you look at Article 12, that's the amount of money the district has to raise, and it's the minimum amount we have to raise in order to get the full amount of state aid that we anticipate, which is on the order of $18 million. So that's one piece. Article 13 is a fairly small article. When Noble High School was built, our voters decided to have the auditorium be somewhat larger than the state allowed, and it was at a local expense. And that article is basically to pay that local piece of the auditorium at the high school. And then when you get to Article 14, the state in its infinite wisdom isn't fully funding EPS. One of the things that they do when they are short on funds is they just decide to give us a smaller amount. So in order to balance this budget, we need an amount of money beyond what the state is willing to support, and that's strictly local dollars. And so that would be the place, if people want to reduce the budget, to look at, because if you reduce Article 12, what happens is you won't get your full state aid, because you need to raise the local amount to get the full state amount. So.
Paul, in the process of going this, to take it one step further, there's about a half a dozen districts in the state that have separated, got away from the SAD 60
Yep.
system. Has ever been a study done to see where each town would be if that were to happen here?
I can give you a bit of history. I haven't looked at it.
No, I'm talking recently. I mean, it seems to be a trend, to be honest with you. When you have 6 districts that have split already, obviously.
True, but most of the ones that are splitting were ones that were kind of forced together in a shotgun marriage because of the consolidation law, and they're feeling like it hasn't exactly worked. I don't know of too many kind of long-standing arrangements that are being looked at for dissolution. It's been more of these more recent combinations. I do know, just going back to a little bit of history, Eleanor kind of alluded to it. Some 10 years ago, there was a push to look at the local calculation. And right now, we weigh 50% evaluation and 50% students to decide the cost between the 3 towns. And we had a committee. We worked a long time at that. There actually was a vote to change it slightly, which actually was defeated in all 3 towns. But one of the things that comes out or came out in that conversation is towns that have, say, lower valuation in relationship to their student population kind of like things to go more heavily weighted towards valuation. Towns that have higher valuation and low student counts would actually prefer to go by student population. And that was an issue when the district was formed. It continues to be an issue to this day. And that was why our founding fathers, for want of a better word, decided to weigh it 50-50. I do know when I go to other towns, we have a town that has high valuation, low student counts. They pay per student about 3 times what the other towns do. So when you talk about, well, either your tax rate is lower or your valuation is such and we think you should pay more, they look at it on a per pupil basis and feel they're already paying way more than the other towns. So it's really all in your point of view. I do know there was a place in time, because if you are to dissolve, one of the things the state requires is that you have a plan for the education of kids, because they don't want you just dissolving a district and then some kids are left out in the cold. And we actually had a point in time where if the valuation was weighted to a certain point, it actually made more sense for North Berwick to leave the district and tuition their kids back to us than to remain part of the district. And what happened was, because the state sets your tuition rate, it actually costs more for Berwick and Lebanon to be in a reduced district without North Berwick than to stay a district, which is part of the reason why I think the vote ultimately went the way it went about a decade ago. Now, I haven't looked at those numbers recently, but I guess my point is we have a fairly efficient district. I think it's worked fairly well. I'm not sure there's a lot to be gained to dissolving the district, if that's what you were thinking. But I do know that was kind of the end result of a conversation that was about a decade ago. There does get to be a point of diminishing returns. So.
And another thing too is, if I remember the law on that when I was up there, you have to keep paying off the mortgages.
Right.
That and
you would still own part of Noble High School.
that's right.
Right.
But that's no different than what we're doing now. We're paying off the mortgage, it's just the 3 communities are paying it off.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
doesn't
well,
hold
that's
much
true,
water in
but-
my
but-
book.
When you put it, at least as I remember the study they did in the legislature, when you put it all together, it is very costly for the town that wants to get out,
Usually.
if I remember correctly on that one.
Mr. Andrade, do you do any type of evaluation of special education costs compared to regular instruction costs? In other words, it looks to me like the special education costs are more than 30% of the regular, or if you combined all of the instructional costs to include the summer programs, it would be about 25% of that total budget. Is that how you look at it? And how do we compare to other districts?
We compare somewhat the same. We have roughly 16% of our student population identified. So that's at least one benchmark. And if you go with the premise that these kids get more services than your non-disabled kid, if we're already at 16% of the population, it's not too far a stretch to say that 20 or 25% of the budget for kids, especially the most severely disabled who are not out-of-district placements, makes some sense. 2 years ago, we had an independent firm come in and analyze our special ed costs and didn't have a whole lot in terms of recommendations for us to get a whole lot more efficient, because we're pretty efficient now.
How do we compare to other districts in terms of that ratio of how you measure it in terms of percentage of students, i.e. 16% of our population is
The state average is 14.
14?
But that's in part driven by demographics and availability of apartments and all sorts of different things. We have 41% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. In Lebanon, it's 55%. So just demographically, we have a fair amount of fairly needy kids and or families. To compare that to some of the coastal communities where they have a 8% free and reduced lunch count, we're just different. We compare similarly to Sanford, Massabesic, Biddeford, and districts that are somewhat more demographically like us.
So it's certainly fair to say that the town of Berwick cannot be accused of discriminating in terms of our planning, in terms of the housing situation.
I really didn't want to bring that up because I know that's been a topic of conversation, but if you want to say that.
So I'm trying to, put my arms around this relationship between what the Board of Selectmen does in terms of planning for growth within the community to the reaction that you need to make within your budget that's clearly driving costs.
I guess the only point I would make is you can't sustain a 24% increase in student population. We can't sustain that without some significant issues. So, I don't like telling towns how to do their business or whatever, but I would just say that you can't sustain what we've been sustaining. When we add 200 kids at the Hussey School, that is the entire population of the primary school. Something needs to be different. So,
in the projected enrollment spreadsheet that you put before us, that just gives raw numbers broken down by grade, but it doesn't give any estimates in terms of future special needs percentages or anything like that. So,
no, I would say you could just track at about 15,
percentage.
16% of that number. I'll leave it at that, I guess.
I have a question in regards to a much smaller part of what was cut out of the budget, but one that affects a good portion of the network that I'm in personally, and that's the freshman sports being cut. What is the total dollars that get saved by cutting that from the
It's
budget?
about $40,000.
So it's about $40,000.
About $23,000 in coaches' stipends, some amount in transportation, and then some amount for officials for freshman games and those sorts of things.
And how many kids do you figure, for lack of a better word, disenfranchised because of that?
Probably around 100. One of the reasons the board made that decision is in looking at our numbers, and I don't know if it's the digital generation or they have other things to do like be on Facebook. We didn't field freshman teams in a couple of sports this year because we just didn't have the numbers. So although we had those budgeted, the board felt that we could make this reduction with less of an impact on kids because we weren't fielding those teams anyway just because of numbers.
So those kids will just have the opportunity to play junior varsity sports or whatever, they'll get rolled into that.
Probably.
How heavy is your intramural sports? Is that a fairly strong group, or is it non-existent?
It's fairly strong at the elementary level. We allocate something on the order of $3,000 to $4,000 per school. And we offer anything from chess to floor hockey and those sorts of things. It's fairly robust at the middle school. Not so much at the high school because kids have interscholastic options and some of those sorts of things. So I'd say K-8, it's pretty strong, less so at the high school.
Any questions?
Yes, sir. Please step up to the podium.
explain what, I'm sure it says teacher salaries, read recovery, K through 2.
Yep.
That's 2.2 million.
Okay. The state accounting system just gets more and more intricate, and that line is actually our K through second grade teachers and our reading recovery teachers, which is a specialized remedial reading program for first graders. So that line is the salaries of those folks, the lower grade ones, the primary grades.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Rodriguez.
It's a comment to the board about the school budget, if that's appropriate.
As long as it pertains to the budget, we'll entertain the question or comment, certainly. Could you please step up to the podium?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do find it a bit disingenuous as some of the board expresses concern with the school budget. This is a difficult issue for me to address because I believe the education of our children is the most important thing we do, and we need to stand behind that, and we need to provide the schools the resources they need to provide that quality education. You mentioned the affordable housing project with the low-income and very low-income housing coming to Berwick.
Well, I didn't mention it in reference to this.
I'm sorry.
Directly.
Okay, we had asked for an analysis of the cost, one of those issues being the cost to educate the children. I'm sorry Mr. Trefethen stepped out because he may want to hear that. In review of some files, we did see on August 22nd, Mr. Trefethen had estimated the 34-unit housing project might add 4 students to the school system. Mr. Trefethen estimated that would be an increase of cost of about $17,184 a year to the town of Berwick. A couple days later, Nathan Bateman did an estimate. He estimated 12 to 34 children. He used a cost of $1,300 per student per year and estimated the cost to the school of about $15,000 to $45,000. Because we've asked over and over for an analysis, never received one, I have done one. With the addition of the 3-bedroom units, there will be 12 additional bedrooms in that project. 12 additional bedrooms could add anywhere from 12 students to 24 if we only estimated 2 children per bedroom. 24 students added to Berwick will increase the cost to the town by over $100,000, or right around $100,000. So again, I ask the board to please take a stance on this and please send a letter to the planning board urging them not to allow these changes. I also want to point out, if I was a suspicious person, I'd think it was done on purpose, but I'm not suspicious. I trust the town manager and I trust Bateman Partners, but it just seems odd that the school meeting is the same night Bateman will be coming before the planning board here. Just seems odd to me that that happened and that that was scheduled after the school meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Mrs. Wheeler.
As a current chair, I'd just like to make a few comments, and I have total respect, believe me, as a taxpayer in this town and as a board member. Probably, I don't know, Paul can say whether I'm accurate or not, but I think I'm one of the more conservative members, and I think Berwick in general has the most conservative board members of the group. But it's getting a little bit difficult, given sort of the trend in Berwick for the population increase, to sit at a table with people who don't have, who won't see this budget, as Paul said, from the same perspective we do. Look at, in that booklet, what Lebanon's going to see. And it's a little difficult to sit at the table and say, things need to change while we're shipping in kids. I would back up what Mr. Rodrigue just said, only suggest that his $100,000 figure is probably relatively low if we look at what the documents Bateman provided suggested that population is required to include. If that population is required to include severely mentally handicapped populations, one of those district out of populations can cost twice what he's suggesting potentially. So if we have 24 of those, we're in really deep trouble. I have tremendous appreciation for Paul coming here tonight and making the comment about the sustainability of that. We're in deep trouble. You send us to the table, and I take this with tremendous sense of responsibility to cut that budget and make it affordable for people like myself who, quite honestly, I'm starting to feel like I can't afford to live here anymore. If the attitude of the board and the planning board is going to be that we're going to find a way for this man to go forward, I don't know how I can go back to the table and do what Bob, you're telling us to do. That's not the increase that you're describing. We used jobs money to bring that budget down last year. It's not like we're seeing that kind of a transportation increase. Look at what the tuition for out-of-state placements for our special education is. It's a huge amount. The increase you're seeing in system administration, we moved Elva, who was included in regular instruction, into system administration to help with the population Berwick brought in recently. We have a trailer park that is still scheduled to go in the street, across the street from the Vivian Hussey School. That trailer park was sold to the public as a 55 and older. It is not mentioned on the plan to be 55 and older. If those 80 to 90 units going across the street from the Vivian Hussey School, in addition to the Bateman project, I can't go to that table and tell you I'm going to cut this budget. This budget isn't going to cut. It's going to keep going up, and it's going to be an issue for us because we're one of 3 towns. How do you want us, as 1/3 of a voting body, to say this budget must go down when other towns may be doing their responsible duty in planning efforts to maintain a viable population that's affordable for their infrastructure and their taxpayers, and Berwick's not doing that. We are sort of a disconnected, disjointed unit here. We have a planning board that's saying yes to pretty much everything coming before them because they're afraid to say no in spite of people who are losing their houses. I sat here a week or so ago while you went through a list of foreclosures, and I expect we'll be seeing more added to that list. But I don't want you to think we don't take this seriously. We most certainly do. And at the open hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I've ever seen anything cut. I think I've only seen things added back in. Am I correct?
2 years ago, they added freshman sports.
The freshmen twice now, I think we've seen once. We've only seen things put back in. So if I'm sitting at a table over the past few months that we've been doing this, cutting, and I have 20 to 30 people in the room saying, we want that back, we want that back. Those 20 to 30 people are going to get 20 to 30 of their friends, and whatever we sat and painfully cut is going to be put back in. Well, most of Berwick isn't even there. So I would suggest to you that if you feel strongly that there are cuts we should have made, happy to see you there at that first hearing to talk about those, because this is a very delicate balance we're walking with 2 towns that don't see this the same way we do at all. I see it your way. My taxes are going to go up, and I'm really tired of it. But I tirelessly come to all of these meetings and beg you to work with the planning board, to talk to other towns that have really good plans, but I have, over the past 5 to 9 years, seen no such thing going on. We sort of operate in our own bubble and then scream about it afterwards. So I'm really hoping that this is an opportunity for Berwick to say, our taxpayers really can't afford this. We need to go sit down with our planning board and develop a comprehensive philosophy for where we want to go, who we'd like to be able to afford to live in this town, and what makes sense when we're sitting at the table. I'm listening to some of this, and it just doesn't make sense to me. I hear you. I'd like to cut it, but we do have to provide a responsible education for the kids who do want to live in this town. And we really are doing the best we can at doing that, but we need some help here in maintaining a cost control that we're not going to be able to maintain. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wheeler.
Poirier.
Ken Poirier. I'm addressing this to both the audience and the board. The new Noble High School was built. When they approached us with it, they said 42,000, excuse me, I'm a low-income guy. 42 million was the bottom line, something like that. The voters turned that down, then they come back with something in the 30 million. Then somebody brought up the question, when you built that new high school on Cranberry Meadow Road, if students increased, you could go up with it. You know what I mean, by going up with it, raise above it? I don't remember the principal before Mr. Bergman, but I'll bet you do. Who was his name?
Paul Johnson?
Paul Johnson. When asked that question, why can't you go up with it? The septic system will not handle it.
Do that. It's in the swamp.
Now, after they built the new high school over there for I don't know how many $1 million, I noticed as I drive up to my home on Old Sanford Road, somebody went out by those tennis courts and built some Indian burial mounds. Those are not by any means above ground septic systems. They're Indian burial grounds. I see the little white tube coming up. Do I trust you? No.
Thank you, Mr. Poirier. Mrs. Wright.
Jody Wright from 12 Wilson Street. And I'm going to start by giving this room and the public my cell phone number, which is 603-491-1444. And my email address is jwright@midmaine, like the state, midmaine.com. And why I'm giving you my number and my email address is because of budgetary problems here in town. First of all, I don't understand, and I don't want to be critical to any of you sitting here, except one. I cannot understand why we still have employed via our town Keith Trefethan. It is beyond me, beyond any comprehension, why we have a town manager.
Mrs. Wright, could you please keep the comments directed towards the school budget?
Since 2005, late 2005, when Jody Wright moved to Berwick, Maine, my taxes have almost doubled. When I purchased my house in 2005, part of the way I purchased it, and this is how it comes to the budget, is I purchased it relative to what the taxes were in Berwick. I have been coming to meetings, I've been involved, and since I have been coming to meetings, that's all that happens in this town is our taxes increase. So why I gave you my email address and my telephone was if anyone else has the same feelings that I do, that Keith Trefethan has not done his job as town manager, please email me, please call me. Because I'm going to share with you, considering the budget, I've said it before to all of you, January 22nd of 2012, the electricity bill, which is part of your budget, was taken out of Bateman Partners' name. They have been working in that building since midsummer 2011, but the town has had that bill on their ledger since that time till January 2012. Why is the town paying for Bateman's electric bill? That's number one. Number two, I can't understand if we are here and we tell you over and over and over that we're spending too much all across the board, why there hasn't been a cut, like a 10% cut straight across the board. I don't understand why the town manager hasn't fiscally done the right things for this town, besides doing other things that has sold us out in many capacities. But anyways, I again want to say that we need to, as expediently as possible, get rid of Keith Trefethan before he destroys the town.
Okay. I think that wraps up the school budget. Anybody else have anything? Anybody else in the audience? Okay. Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Andrade. Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler.
Mr. Clement is here.
Very good. All right, we're going to move on to the Berwick Library trustees. Mr. Clement.
Mr. Chairman, I'm
Yes,
going
ma'am.
to excuse myself from this. I am a member of the board, and I would love to give my opinion, but I don't think it would look right.
Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Murphy.
Good evening.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
I've got a few handouts here. I can assure you my numbers aren't as large, but I do think they're as important. And because there are 3 new board members, I just thought I would just briefly give a little history about the library and where we're at and a little bit of where we're trying to get to. Well, unlike most towns, the library in Berwick has not been an institution. That didn't come about really until the late 80s. Then the idea of building a new library came about in the early 90s, and primarily driven by Richard Stillings, who left in his estate a sum of money, a fairly large sum of money, to be used to build a new library. And part of that was a request that it had to be done within 10 years, or those monies would then go back to his estate to be distributed accordingly. So with that as an impetus, a lot of time was spent between 94 and 2004 around what do we do? Where do we go? Where do we build it? Along the way, the Philbricks, up on where the library now is, owned that property, donated that land also to be used for the library. So a task team was put together and a fundraising event went around, and the Prime Tan also stepped up, and they contributed through their efforts and 2 different initiatives another $150,000 to make it happen. So with those 3 impetuses and then a public campaign beside the point to bring another $150,000 to the table, a new library came into being. We opened that library in July of 2005. And at that point, I would get up here and say, you can't treat the library as an ongoing entity. It was an entity that was just coming about, and we really had to get it off the ground. And that was the path that we've been on since, which I'm going to review with you a little bit tonight. But that's a little bit of history. Along with that history, though, one more thing. There were a couple of non-binding, what's the word I want to use, warrants for the town folks to ask 2 questions. One, do you think the library is important to the town? And are you willing to pay tax dollars to help support the library? And both times, those were by far well over 90% yes to each time that was done. So there's no question in my mind that the people of Berwick wanted the library, and there's definitely no question in my mind at this point that they only want the library. They really see the value of the library, and our patronage and the kind of services we provide are continuing to grow. So that's enough history. Get into our budget. The first page is just a little bit of a status of where we're at as far as 2012 is concerned. We continue to operate at 26 hours a week. When we first opened, we tried to get it to 32. We did get it to 32. And then when the crunch hit, we decided we couldn't, rather than cut people, we decided to cut hours. So it's not like you have a lot of people. We have basically 80 man hours a week that we use to run the library, made up of a director and an assistant librarian and several part-timers. But altogether, that adds up to 80 hours to support a 26-hour operating window. Sandy Broomfield, who was our librarian director, when we opened, resigned this past year, retired. Her husband had passed away a couple of years ago. She has children down in the New Jersey area, and she felt it was time for her to retire and spend more time with her children. We are pleased to introduce Rita Nappy. Rita has come to us and started as of January 1 of this year as our new library director. And I am pleased to say she's well in tune and is very much involved with what's going on with the library and really brings a lot of good skills and ideas that we need to be looking at. We are saddened by the loss of Neil Gallagher. Neil Gallagher was on the board for the past 6 years. He was our treasurer, and he passed away this past summer, and he sorely missed. Neil was very involved with the library, not only from a treasurer's point of view, but he was also a contractor, so he took care of a lot of our building issues and maintenance stuff, and which we're starting to see, and you see in my results a little bit of a blip in some of our numbers because of that. We took Neil for granted, and we didn't realize all that he did contribute. I am pleased to say, though, we've been very fortunate that Kathy Swiger, who's here tonight, she has stepped up to join the board and has taken on the role of treasurer. And also nice to know, Kathy is also a niece of Richard Stillings. We expect to finish our fiscal year 2012 unfavorable to budget by an estimated $6,000 to $7,000. The primary purposes are, we decided early on in the year that we've been looking at the library. In the library right now, we do not have the use of the basement, and it's built with a basement, but to use as more or less a utility room and furnace and other things. And we cannot use it other than storage, and we store books down there, and you can ask Ellen. Ellen goes up and down the stairs all the time. So we looked at if we really need space or better utilization of space, should we not look at the basement first? And we did. The point is, I think it's going to cost us more maybe to utilize the basement the way we'd like to due to sprinkler systems. And right now, there's no sprinkler systems upstairs. You do the downstairs, you got to do the upstairs. So we've stepped back, and we've decided we would approach our space needs and how do we drive utilization just very selectively, buying and picking, choosing selected pieces of furniture that will give us better cube utilization of the library upstairs before we approach something as massive as we think the downstairs utilization will be. So part of that, we did install some new media shelving this year. And we purchase and install art, and we put on display every month artware from our local artists who contribute, and we've been tacking it onto the walls, and obviously you know what that's doing to the walls. So we decided to put in a better approach with an art hanging system for the display purposes. And also, a year and a half ago, we participated with a grant vis-a-vis the state of Maine to pick up 5 new computers. And through this grant process, we will pick up, starting in this coming year, with the first-year service fee for the new library management system named Destiny. But the whole purpose of all this was, number one, upgrading where we were, tying together so now all the towns, Berwick, South Berwick, North Berwick, we're all in the same system with the state of Maine, and we get the benefit of the complete system network and all they provide, which we didn't have before. And that grant basically was right around $12,000 to $13,000, and is very much a key benefit to the library. Our fundraising efforts fell a little bit short of expectations, even though early on our memorial contributions were up. Now, obviously, I don't sit down every year this time and figure out who's going to die and who isn't and how much money I'm going to get. That's something we do not budget. We do put in a low number, but we don't necessarily become very aggressive around that number. But the biggest one is that our largest fundraiser each year has been we help support the Trail Riders event. The Trail Riders is a group of land bikes who have a race here in town, and we would go over Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and provide beverage, food, etc. And that fundraiser netted us between $4,000 to $4,500 a year. We lost that this year, only because they chose not to do it this year. We're hoping that the year that we're now in, that we will see it again this fall. So that went by the wayside. But I don't want this to reflect in any way the efforts that are continually put forth by the board members, the Friends, BPL staff, and all the other volunteers. And also thanks to those of you who continue to contribute via membership in the association and donations in general. And also thanks for the town for their continued support, as it just would not happen without it. We have one good news. We have a young man at the library who's been volunteering his time, named Nick Bray. His name was submitted by Sandy as a youth volunteer to the state of Maine, and he was voted the Youth Volunteer of the Year for the state of Maine, which was we felt real good about, and he certainly appreciated our efforts with that. We continue to seek out grants that may be available that will enhance our offerings to our patrons. This past year, we received the Kennebunk Savings Grant of $2,500, which is something we would get every year, and it's $2,500 is shared between the 3 Berwicks, and it's for some of the museum passes that we offer up as services through the library. Got a Walmart grant for $500, which allowed our teen group to purchase a movie projector and screen, which they're getting involved with. It's a teen advisory group, and we're trying to get more of our youth participating in some of the activities of the library. There's also an environmental literacy $250 grant sponsored by Maine Reads. This is being used to meet and prepare for additional grant that will be used for planting a community garden. And if those of you who have gone by the library of late, you can see we're starting to construct a little box areas for gardens. We're going to go very slowly at first, but there is a plan. And we hope that additional grant will come, and that has to be used to plant a garden, purchase new books to augment environmental inventory, and a BPL supplement our Earth Day festivities. And bottom line, the use of the library continues to grow, as evidenced by growth in circulations, computer use, and number of patrons. We are receiving a growing number of inquiries as to when we are going to add operating hours to our weekly schedule. With that being said, and before we get into the budget, I'm just going to ask Rita. The next page is the Berwick Public Library, and these are the, more or less, not the historical, but some of the activities and accomplishment the library has achieved in 2011-12. It's also a good way for me to introduce you to her, and with that, Rita.
Hello, it's nice to be here. As you all heard, I'm new. And so I'd like to thank you for allowing me a few minutes to compliment you on your town's library. It's great. I think it's great. It is great. We're doing I'm taking over the doing of great things. As Warren already mentioned, we got 5 desktop computers as well as 4 laptops, so that you can walk in and grab a laptop and sit wherever you want in the library, as well as at the 5 desktops. I see those used mostly by adults, although just this evening there were 2 or 3 kids at those. I see people coming in to use those to look for jobs. I see those adults coming in to stay in touch with their relatives through emails. So I see that's a great service for our community. We have story times on Fridays and on Saturdays for the for little kids and a little bit older kids. We have a cross-generational book club that's happening tonight. The adults and young adults read Kite Runner, and now they're going to see the film and talk about the movie. So there's that age group getting in touch with another age group. And you've already heard about the Maine Reads Planning Grant, which is a huge deal. It's so innovative. It's so in front of. It makes us a library leader, and we're not just following the pack. We're doing something really new and different, because I think that I believe that our library wants to keep up with the changing information landscape and to help our patrons learn how to get the most out of the resources that are at their fingertips. And as I will repeat it, our world has changed significantly recently, and it's going to keep on changing, and that's what libraries are for, to help all people all of the time to live their lives and be inspired.
Thanks, Rita. Thank you. With that being said, if you can turn to the page where it's, the next page is a sourcing of funds. And this just gives you an idea of how the monies flow. From the library perspective, like on memberships, membership in the library is a $10 membership. And just what the membership entails is you can basically vote at our annual meeting. You can come into our meetings if you choose and participate. But it's really a vehicle to say, is another way for us to generate some income to the library and get more participation to those who want to belong and do more. Donation other was $3,600. We do have people come in from time to time or write us a check. Donation memorials this past year was $4,090. Like I say, that's again, I usually put $1,000 in there because that's one that I can't count on year to year. And then fundraisers of $8,000. And fundraisers go from Dogs and Hackmatack Farmers Market, you can see them there, all the way down to plant sale and book sale, which are just coming up on the calendar as I speak. And then some miscellaneous other activities. So basically, we raise, through our efforts each year, around $20,000. We supplement that with the town appropriation of last year of $69,500, come up with total sources of funds of $89,000. And basically, the good news with the library, we have no debt. We have been managed and balanced our revenues to our expenses each and every year. And we try to increase that, and that's why I come to you from time to time to say, help us increase to get more to where we want to go. Whether it's resources, whether it's more operating hours, whether it's books, or whatever it may be, we still are a long way to go to get to where we will be a full-fledged library. I put a little note in the bottom of this page, because sometimes you can look at numbers and you say, well, what do they mean? Well, the note at the bottom of the page is really $1 support per cap in Maine towns with population of 5,000 to 999 people. And the average of all towns, that number is $19.49. Taking that times the Berwick population, which was 7542, and I think it's close to that now, but maybe a little bit higher, that means that would be a budget of $146,994. If you took a median of all the towns, it'd be $15.43 per cap. Again, times the Berwick population, that'd be a budget of $116,373. Berwick, with the 922 per cap, with our 7542, drives to our $69,500 that appropriation we get from the town. South Berwick is $14.76. Again, against their population, their budget's $105,623. And North Berwick is $35.80 times 4832 budget population for a budget of $172,986. The reason I only share that, I'm not saying we're doing bad or we haven't, because we're on a journey, and we hope that you can continue on that journey and help support us. But it gives you some perspective around what the number does mean. If you turn the page, this is line item detail of the 2011-12 budget. You can see that I'm forecasting that we're going to come in slightly over $6,000 to budget. And it goes back to those items that I mentioned earlier. You can see under capital and furniture, that relates to the art hanging system and the storage shelves that we put in for the audio. The only other thing, you can see our electricity runs a little bit higher than it has, and also our telephone. Computer is up $500, and that's strictly because we also made a decision. We've been very fortunate over the years to have a volunteer come in and try to manage our systems around the computers. Well, our systems have grown. Our standalones need to be integrated. It's gone beyond the time that he can devote to it Plus, it's probably beyond the time of his capability on an ongoing basis. So we have chosen to go outside, and we're going to bring in a professional support group in order to manage our computer network. And you'll see that more in our budget. But basically, you can see by line items, we're pretty much holding things flat. We do have revenues matching to our costs, and even though the 91 is overspent, we'll be able to manage that. We don't zero out our bank account, so we get a little bit in our bank account. If you go into the next page, which is the BPL budget proposal, and at the same time, the cause of change. What we're proposing is a budget of $91,200 for next year. In other words, we're decreasing what we're actually doing this year. And again, it's for some of those one-time events that we won't be doing next year. The key assumption, we are going to try to add 1 hour to our operating week. Not get back to 32, but get off at 26 and go to 27. That has roughly an impact of $1,100. We're going to change to a professional computer support service. That has an impact of $1,800. We're going to purchase an overdrive program, which is strictly a program to enable us to download audiobooks. We're getting a lot of requests, as you know, with the electronic age. People want to be able, hey, can we come in here and download some of these books? We're going to have that capability. And this is where, the impact of Neil, one of the things, we've got to add an annual HVAC service. Neil took care of a lot of our stuff, and now we've had a couple issues this past summer. We decided we better make sure we go to an annual HVAC service. It's a $600 impact. Compensation, our salaries remain significantly below state averages. We offer no benefits to any of them, except for 2 of them get some personal time off. Continuity of staff remains a priority. Even during these tough times, we've been able to maintain our staff for the most part, and that has also reflected in the fact that we've been able to accomplish, and we have the reputation that we do have. We've been able to maintain that. You can see capital and furniture is going to be decreased by 65. Again, ties back to the shelving and the art hanging system. We're going to say we're going to monitor utilities, and hopefully this might be a risk, but we're going to have to show that slightly down. And then there's a lot of miscellaneous others in there, which will give us a favorability of $1,525. Bottom line, our proposed budget is $3,037 more than fiscal year 2012 budget, and is $3,891 less than 2012 actual. What we're requesting is a $72,500 appropriation, which is plus $3,000 versus 2012. And we haven't go through this, but on the next page, and you can look at it later, there's a 7-year history by the same line item. You can see we had 3 years in a row where we more or less stayed flat. We got a bump last year, and we're looking for a little bit of a bump for this year. Open up for questions.
Mr. Manager, how much does the returnable/recyclable can drive at the transfer station raise for the Volunteer Firefighters Association each year?
I'm not quite sure. I don't have it on top of my head, Mr. Chairman.
And in light of the Acton land transfer being such a significant revenue generator, albeit one time, for the Berwick Firefighters Association, the Volunteer Firefighters Association, the chair would like to recommend to the board that we consider having the proceeds from the returnable cans at the transfer station benefit the library versus the Volunteer Firefighters Association. And I thought I heard an annual number of, $4,000 to $5,000, but that may be too strong a number. I'm not certain of that recollection.
I'm not certain either, sir.
I'd like to thank you, Warren, for putting out a real good report. I appreciate that.
You will.
The survey? With the survey? We make sure that.
Well, yeah, the one thing I didn't mention, she caught me.
We want you to know that we really listen. We want to know what the people in Berwick want.
What we have prepared, and I'm very careful of surveys, but we're going to do a small survey at the library, asking people, and it's really well structured and very simple, that just so to make sure, as we continue to go forward, we're going forward with the right things that meets the needs of the community. So we're gonna be asking them through a fairly structured survey around what those things are, and so we can establish priorities. Because I'm committed, and as long as I'm involved, you know, our revenues need to match our expenses. And we've been able to do that. We're debt-free, and we'll continue that way, but doesn't mean we don't want to continue to move forward, and we do want to move forward. We'd like to get back to a 32, 36-hour week if at all possible, but that will have to come as times change. At this point, we presented what we presented.
Thank you. So we need to decide whether we're going to increase this request in Article 24 from 69.5 to 72.5.
I'd move that we increase the budget.
I would agree. My family uses the library on a regular basis and is very happy with the services that they provide over there.
So we have a motion and a second to increase it to 72.5. I was thinking that, you know, the proceeds of that, you know, returnable can drive at the transfer station could substitute for the increase, and we could still allocate 69.5 and find those monies elsewhere.
I wonder if there's a way we can offer folks in town an option. I don't know.
Well, we don't know what that is, so do we?
No, we do not.
I personally, I think
don't
to
know
give them an
specifically. I can
opportunity
get that
to
information.
actually plan that budget, they should be basing it on what the request is. And if we end up with some funds, you know, like you're recommending, then that could,
We would always accept more.
yeah,
How about
we all would.
either splitting the difference? I wouldn't have a problem either way.
Okay. Well, without further discussion, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of increasing the town appropriation on Article 24 to 72.5 from 69.5? Raise your right hand. It's unanimous. Mr. Manager? And we will discuss the addition of the can drive at the transfer station to your sources of revenue. Yes, you're welcome. Mr. Clement, thank you. Okay. Mr. Underwood. Mr. Underwood is here to address the possible addition of a warrant article regarding an update of our comprehensive master plan.
Chairman, thank you for the opportunity this evening. I was here the night you were all sworn in and took your seats at the board and said that I wanted to suggest an article to move forward with a revisit of the downtown area. A thing I think that's very, very important to the town, especially when you start hearing some of these other budgets and things being discussed about increases in tax rate impacts and stuff. Another way to mitigate some of those impacts to the local person is to expand your commercial and industrial base a little bit. And we've got an opportunity here to maybe fill a void on the downtown portion. That night I gave you a map, which was pretty much the map out of the land use ordinance that showed the areas are defined. What I did tonight is I just printed out an aerial photo off of Google to kind of show you what the picture is, and I'll just give that to the chair. You can look at that. So basically, the area that I'm looking at as part of this revisiting master plan is if you start at the bridge and you head up Sawmill Road towards the Catholic Church, if you go out behind, I believe it's Berwick Meadows, you cut back across Cumberland up towards Logan Street, you'd come over the other side of Sullivan, over by Prime Blue Sides, come back down all the way to the river where you would pick up like the Brackett and Shaw places along Bridge Street. That's pretty much the area that I think would be looked at as part of the vicinity when it says those specific overlay districts, but the vicinities immediately around it. I just thought that picture would be a little more help. I did have an opportunity to meet with Selectman Krevlin. I believe after you'd had your Saturday work session, he was kind of dubbed to follow up with Frank and see what his thoughts were. I met with Ernie, and he has some experience in this. He's seen other communities that have gone forward with this. There are other organizations out there that help facilitate these things. I think this is an item in town that is going to be so important to us that we are going to need some outside professional assistance to make sure we can put this together and present it to the public, our investors, in a manner that they can clearly understand. And many times a picture goes a long, long ways versus trying to explain it. So we had talked. I gave you a suggested warrant article. The item in there that's missing, obviously, is the dollar amount. These things can cost, and it's funny because I watched the planning board meeting the other evening and they were apparently talking about this, and some of the numbers they threw out ranged upwards to as high as $60,000. That's not what we're saying here, I don't think. We have a lot of resources in town that you can draw on. We have a lot of people in town, I think, that are very interested in this. I look around the room and I see Dana Hall and Dennis Dupree, who's here this evening. We were part of that original Economic Development Committee. The few people that I have spoken to, Mr. Levine, he's even been talking to one of his neighbors, and everybody you seem to bring this up to, Sue Tebow, Attorney Tebow, I had an opportunity to speak with her. It's been positive. Everyone's been approaching this thing as it's something we need to do in town. I think if we draw on those kinds of resources, we get that kind of involvement from everybody in this room, and I'm challenging everybody in this room to be part of this if this goes forward, that through a sequential step of developing the information from what we have for resources to what we think might end up being a vision, it could run on the order of $25,000 would be a fair budget. Normally it would be less than that, but I think we got some pieces that are a little more complicated. We have a bridge, we have a state line, and we've got Somersworth right across the way that is currently doing the same kind of a study in their triangular area, High Street, Washington Street, Market, whatever. They're currently going ahead with their vision for their downtown area in their gateway piece. Well, a gateway works both ways, you know, and this piece now that we're going to do on our side, if the selectmen support this and we get the vote at town meeting, is it's going to be a gateway going the other way. So there's going to be a need for that communication across the river. I know that the DOT had come in here and made a presentation for some preliminary design concepts they're talking about for the bridge. They talked about the next time we meet, could we hold it over in the council chambers so they can watch it on their TV? So there's a little bit of a uniqueness to what we're talking about here because of that gateway component. The other thing, and I talked to several of you during the polling days, we talk about that economic driver, pine tree districts. We talked about the type of industries and businesses that qualify under those programs. We talk about TIF districts, tax increment financing districts. Those are all things that need to be put out there as part of this vision, and they take a little bit of time and they take a little bit of expertise to make sure you're forming and shaping those. I also mentioned about getting a gas line in here. It'd be very important if we could get a gas line into this downtown area to serve the entire core and have it that clean, green type of energy footprint coming from new industries or new businesses that might come into town. So there's a lot of things that make this a little more complicated than your normal $12,000 to $15,000 charrette Main Street type project. And Ernie shaking his head because he knows that's pretty much how those things were put together at that level of funding. But because of these additional pieces, I just think we need to have a budget in place that's a little bit higher so we can get the help we need. That being said, obviously it would go through a procurement, it would go through whatever, and we'd only expend, or whoever is in charge of it would have to control it and obviously come back through the selectmen for any of those expenditures. But that was my thought. I was trying to draw a line in the sand and move everything forward. I think it can be a lot of fun. If you've ever participated in one of these things, they end up being a lot of fun. You usually have a meeting on a Saturday and you get the library can get people to come in and cook the food and donate the beverages, and we'll substitute for the trail riders this year, so. So there's a lot of positives that can come out of this. There will be some negatives, but I think the positives are gonna far outweigh it. So this is not, excuse me, this is not my article. This was one I was suggesting for the selectmen to consider and move that forward. But I think if you do move it forward, you will find it would be a big plus, and you get a lot of support from the community for that. And it is, whether it comes out of new appropriations or whether it comes out of some rainy day fund, I don't know. That's your purview, but the idea is that I think the appropriate number would be 25,000. The other reason I think it's appropriate, because it also puts it in that magic dollar range where it would be voted by everybody that comes and casts a ballot that day, versus 5 or 6 or 30 people, as the school department was talking about, that would just show up at a meeting on a Saturday. So, but there's a lot of reasons, but I think 25,000 is a reasonable number.
Frank, I would assume that you've been involved with grants for this type of thing.
We have TE grants, yeah.
And are they available at this point?
Well, they are. I mean, obviously, you compete for them. The program over in Maine is that traffic enhancement grants through the Department of Transportation. I believe we're using one of those as part of the Rochester Street. I believe we made application for that, and that came through. That's a 20% local and an 80% grant. Oftentimes, for these smaller study pieces, until you can actually develop your plan or your program, and it's been supported, meaning it's been approved by a vote of the town, the governing body, the town, then it gives you far more standing, and I think, in going forward to those grants. So the opportunity to pick up the grants would come out when you're talking about implementing some of these changes. In our case, we're not necessarily looking to be responsible for implementing these things. I'm envisioning that if we put the right plan together and we get it done in a timely manner, and we vote it probably in November, when you're going to have 2,600 to 3,000 people coming to the polls, and you get the people to vote it at that point in time, then that's exactly how we got what we got in town, because we did the same thing. We put it on a ballot, and we showed 2,600 people were in favor of a bank, were in favor of a medical establishment, and that was allowed us to go to the Kennebunk Savings and the York Hospital. So I think if we have that kind of a vote endorsing our plan, our vision for the downtown area, you're going to end up with multiple developers that would come in now and look at it and make it happen for us and be part of it for us. So. And Ernie was on that original committee too. I shouldn't leave him out.
Anything you'd like to add?
I'd just like to say that I think that is the most important parcel in the middle of town that we have to deal with. I mean, that's 10 acres of economic development that will work on the other end of things to create tax revenue to help bring down the tax rate. And I would support what Frank has proposed 100%.
And I'd just like to say that the feeling I get, we're going to be proactive instead of reactive. And usually if you're proactive, that's when things come out a lot better.
Right.
So I'm certainly in favor of it 100%. And now, I remember when we did our first comprehensive plan, and we used Southern Maine Regional Planning.
We did, I believe.
that,
Dick
yeah.
Stillings was the planner at the time when we had that position as a filled position, and yes, we did use the Southern Maine Planning. I don't know. I think Paul Schumacher is still there.
Yeah,
think
he is.
I spoke with him briefly. I'm not sure if you got any feedback.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. When I spoke with Paul, he said that the budget was a little bit lighter than what Frank was describing. Anywhere between $15,000 and $20,000 would be what his suggestion would be at this point. But I guess I'm curious about the logistics and how this would come together in terms of when dollars would need to be required. Are we looking at putting together a local group first to begin establishing the parameters and looking at possible recommendations on zoning changes and those types of things, and then moving into the comprehensive plan piece of this, or is it all work together, Frank?
I think it all needs to work together. I mean, obviously, we can do some of that stuff within our own. You know, we can look at our own resources, we can look at what we've got. We've got all kinds of access to traffic counts, we got all kinds of stuff available to us. But we need the guidance. We gotta make sure that when you get to where now you're starting to gather the formal input from the public, and now you're starting to shape that, and you usually use a charrette type of a process. And people are talking, and everything is being thrown at the wall, and if it sticks, it's good. Some people in a large group can just dispel something as being not practical. You know, would you put an oil refinery in downtown Berwick? Well, no, you're not going to do that. But the point is, I think we need that guidance from the early on, so that then when we get to the point where now you're going to start putting together these renderings and these drawings. When we did that, a similar type project over in Newmarket, when we got done with our first round of public input, the firm that was doing the renderings, we made up all these panel boards. And we were forcing people to walk around the community to see what the community was about. And as they were walking, just vision what it would look like if we did this. So we would take these poster boards and we would put them in the bank, the post office, the Legion, the Eagles Club, the entrance to the mill, the library, Morelli's Market, places that people would frequent. And as soon as they got there and they saw one of these panel boards, they would see that if they want to see another one, they'd walk to the library. If they want to see. So we got them walking around town. I would envision being able to have that professional assistance in the beginning, because then they can help shape that kind of a presentation to the public. I think when all is said and done, can be a very walkable community. The downtown area could be. I mean, we got some traffic issues. We got a lot of cars coming through here, but part and part traffic calming is some of the issues as well. But it needs to be, I think it needs to be done right from the get-go, as far as having that person or that assistance involved. At the end now, if you're starting to look at TIF districts or Pine Tree districts or some of those financial means, grants, that could probably hold off. That maybe ends up being just working with the state, but knowing what to show them that we're doing and see if it best fits their programs. So,
Thank you.
You know, keeping this whole process transparent and, you know, having the public's ability to participate is key.
when we did Newmarket, after that first walkthrough, by the time we had the panel boards done, we were downstairs, and they went all the way down the wall, all the way across the front, and all the way up the back. And people would say, I like that from there, and I like that from here, I like this one, I don't like that, you know. And it was that, and everybody had the sense that they were now part of it, and we were pulling this thing in together. So then, based on that, we boiled it down to 3 or 4 panel boards that incorporated all those pluses, just kind of the ones that people totally were against. And then the second one became the very effective meeting where everybody, we had over 80 people. And then we've had questionnaires, and people normally when they have like you go to a conference and they want you to fill out a survey. You know, at the end they want you to rank everybody. We had this questionnaire that then it spoke to all the issues. And within all those issues it said, do you rate this high, low, or whatever? We had people that sat there and wrote page after page after page. And they stayed there for an extra 2 hours because they wanted to talk about things. If you do this right, I'm convinced you can get that level out of this town of enthusiasm and support.
I think so too.
I'm convinced that we really don't have an option if we want to move this town forward and progress as a town as a whole, and hopefully bring you closure to maybe some of our revenue issues and all kinds of other problems. I think it's imperative that we look towards the future and approve this proposal that Mr. Underwood has put before us to get put on the warrant. It's certainly a lot more exciting topic, something to look forward to rather than anything else. And really, it's the prime reason that I got into this whole process. I think it's imperative that we move forward with this.
Well, you're gonna roll up your sleeves and we're gonna have a good time. You don't need to wear a necktie.
I don't know how many of you was here the night the DOT did the bridge, but those of us that were here, Bob was here. I was quite excited about it when they started, you know, to design the bridge work and the railings and showed us the different things, you know, for the state.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I don't think we had cable at that time either. And I thought, geez, because in Somersworth has got $500,000 to spend on that from their senators got it from, they said. So I thought, gee, that's going to be great to have a bridge coming into Maine or leaving Maine, whichever way you look at it, that will look like that. It's a beautiful
It's funny,
design.
in Newmarket, from those renderings that they did at those charrettes, they've built the project out over there. If you go to their website, they have pictures, and you just scroll through the pictures on the very front. And from those renderings, what it looked like on paper is exactly what it looks like after the project was complete, when you look at the lights and the planters and the sidewalks
yeah.
and the bandstand and all the pedestrian areas and stuff. It really came out nice.
And Berwick Community TV was there, and
It
that
was
video,
there at that
it's
time?
available on YouTube.
Yeah, it
for
is available.
people.
Yeah,
Okay, oh, good, because they had some great, I thought there was a great presentation. And the person who presented it, not really a Berwick boy, but his father and grandfather were Berwick boys. It was Craig Goodrich.
Goodrich,
Yeah,
yes.
Stanley Goodrich and
Right.
and, his grandson, so.
Well, if it's appropriate, I'd like to make a motion to move this warrant forward at a level of $25,000.
I'll second it.
No further discussion, all in favor? Unanimous, again, Mr. Manager.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Underwood.
you.
You know, one of the
They're
things that I,
doing something positive for a change, aren't we?
one of the things I'd like to bring before the board is, I have a strong feeling that we would benefit by hiring a grant writer for this community. And I'm not saying a salaried position. What I'm saying is the grant writer would receive a percentage of the grant received. Upon receiving of the grant, I don't care whether it's for reconstruction of downtown or if it's to put in a sewer line, it doesn't make a bit of difference. If we had somebody that is effective at doing this, to me, we could draw in a lot of funds that would be beneficial to this town. And it wouldn't be at any expense to the town to do that, because you would either authorize a 1% example out of the grant. Most grants do have some form of payment for providing the basic work for it. That's a standard procedure. And I just think that, you know, tonight is not a night we should be dealing with that, but I have a strong feeling that that would be beneficial to the town.
Probably would. Because grant writing is quite an art.
Okay. Berwick Sewer District, Mr. Wheeler.
Good evening. I know we've got a few new faces to the board, so I'll try and give you a little synopsis or brief history of what the sewer district is. Following the first two requests tonight, I'm not sure, though, whether it's a good thing to be here or not. Either we're going to look like a small article, and you'll say yay, or maybe you'll just think it's more money. But we have a couple board members here tonight. Priscilla Doobie, who's our chairman. Dave Stolpe, you probably all know, he's attends a meeting sometimes. And Nelson Goodwin, who's our secretary. I was going to start a different way, but following Frank, there's nobody that would more support his idea than the Berwick Sewer District, and for good reason. In 2008, the end of 2008, when Prime left town, for the sewer district, they represented 50 to 60% of our income. And it's just gone. We had a budget of 1.2 generally since the early 90s, and that income was gone. And we were left with a facility that was huge, can't efficiently operate on what we get today, the 200,000 gallons a day, and no way to make up that income. So the redevelopment commercially or industrially in Berwick would be a huge benefit to us. I mean, or represents some potential. So I wholeheartedly would support that initiative. For the sewer district, just to give you an idea where it came from, the Clean Water Act, when that was the Federal Clean Water Act was established, I think in 1948. Along with that came a responsibility to towns to stop discharging untreated waste into clean bodies of water like the Salmon Falls River, and as well as I think it's a responsibility to provide not only sewage and sewage treatment, but a place for dumping of septage to any other residents that aren't tied to your sewer. A lot of towns and cities dealt with that differently. Some cities maintain that responsibility themselves under their own umbrella, and but in Maine, probably a lot of states, a lot of towns chose to form separate districts. In 1963, the Berwick Sewer District was established. We have the same border, basically, that as the town, is what we represent. And after many years of looking for a place and how to do it, along in 1975, the first treatment facility, collection system, everything was put together, and a debt undertaken. A meeting had to be held to determine how to pay for that debt, and whether to take it on, and then how to pay for that debt, who to charge. They were establishing rates. We had the district meeting was actually held in the town hall, because the district being the same as the town, almost the same as the town meeting. From that meeting, lo and behold, not only were the rates established, but a rate called the betterment fee was established in 1975 to be paid for 40 years, amended during the meeting, but it ended up being 50% of what the sewer district's debt was at that time, or the $39,000, which is the request we're bringing back to the board. It will be represent, and it has always been used to pay off debt. Any of those payments we receive go into our fund to pay off our reserve debt and indebtedness, and I think, the town has some responsibility in that to maintain that capacity for the betterment fee. There's a lot of reasons really why the district is a benefit to the town, but we have all kinds of unused capacity which you don't have in a lot of places. It's something it's hard to say an asset, right? But it is an asset because extra sewage capacity is not everywhere. Yes, sir. I've been doing my research. I've talked to a few of you, and I've been probably after Frank or some of his engineers suggested you should find a brewery because they produce a lot of wastewater. That's what I'd love to see across the street. Let me tell you, I've spoken to a few, and there's some potential, but that's not here. I asked Keith to forward you some information. Otherwise, the handout we had last meeting, I don't know if you have it. I have copies. But simply, I was just going to ask Frank to speak towards the numbers. He generally put those together, and he can answer any questions you have as far as that sheet.
Yeah, for a little bit of history here, Underwood Engineers is the firm I own, and we've been doing work for the sewer district for years, and helped them through a lot of situations in dealing with the industry. In particular, Prime was not easy to deal with. But as a result, got that plant upgrade. If you'd ever gone down there and saw the 5 acres of sludge, the mountains out in the back, and the state that the plant itself was in because of the type of wastewater that was discharged from the tannery, it was in pretty sad shape. But we got that all sorted out. Makes a long story short, by the time we were done, Prime Tanning paid about 95% of all the capital costs for those improvements to the plant and closing the sludge pile. We were lucky to be able to get that all undertaken before they left. Had we not have done that, we'd be here with a different problem. But historically, the town has always voted that 39,000. It's very similar in the request that the water department requests for their hydrant rental. It's the same kind of a concept where you put out on the larger base, meaning the tax base, a portion of your budget. In this case, it was 39,000 for the sewer district. And it's there because people have access to it through their septic haulings. There's a quality of life in town because we do have a municipal infrastructure and a treatment plant. As Jay indicated, it's bigger than the existing users need. And it's a way to help out the users because oftentimes large capital infrastructure cannot be supported by the users alone. They need to have some other kind of a stipend. So this is very comparable to the hydrant rental fee that you guys put on your warrant article. We're asking to reinstate this 39,000. It was on there for a long time. 1 year, town manager Jim McMahon just took it off. We got the trustees, we came back, we met with the manager and the board, and they got it reinstated. And it was voted successfully for another 3 years, every year by the townspeople. And then it was taken off by boards. And I don't think it's been on there.
In 2007 in June, yeah, the selectmen themselves refused to forward it.
So they refused, it was a warrant article that was requested by the sewer district to be put on the warrant for the townspeople to vote, and the selectmen refused to put it on.
I just wanted a little bit, sorry. At that time, the reason was, they're looking at our end of the year audit. The Berwick Sewer District had probably 1.6 million, I think, in reserve accounts. And which, if you really understand what we have and what our district is, we could lose a centrifuge, and that's $500,000. I mean, there's a lot of big equipment. We needed that money to repair and maintain the system. That was June of 2007 when that wasn't forwarded. Remember, at the end of 2008, Prime left. That money is basically gone. We've spent it. We've used as much wisely as we could to make repairs, but this board has also subsidized our budget since Prime was left to not put extra costs onto the users that are remaining. It's not fair, but it's gone, and we're still a little bit short of what we, our budget's just over $700,000.
So we're back. Sewer trustees are back to ask the board to put it on the warrant as an article to be voted on by the town. And like I said, historically, every time it's been on there, the townspeople have supported that small stipend to assist the ratepayers on the sewer side. So that's really, in essence, what the request is here this evening, to reinstate that $39,000 stipend.
So what is the operating shortage less that amount? I mean, is this going to be used for capital needs or?
Well, they've had some capital needs down there as well, because, I mean, we had to reconfigure some things. They've had to buy a new, when they had the original dewatering equipment there, for example, when Prime, these were these large centrifuges. They were 200 and 250 horse motors, tandem motors on them. They dimmed the lights in the neighborhood when they started. I mean, these things were monsters. With Prime gone, Prime's wastewater was equivalent to serving the city of South Portland, 50,000 people. That's how much we were dealing with from Prime. So when that's gone, now you have got these pieces of equipment that are totally inefficient at the smaller flows that we're seeing and at the smaller loadings that we're seeing. And then if you're trying to store all that sludge and then try to process it, the sludge itself is deteriorated. So it becomes to a point where you can't really handle it. It just becomes unmanageable. So part of what they're doing is getting rid of those centrifuges and now putting in smaller equipment that can handle what we're seeing for flows today and into the near future, not with a large wet industry like Prime was. It's mostly capital items that they've been using those funds for. You got to remember too, they also lost some people. They got Central Maine Power in there, and they went back through all their time of use and when their peak demand was being set, they make sure they're not setting a peak demand during summer when everybody's running electricity and this, that, and the other. So, I mean, they've been very creative, but we're at a point where all those avenues have been exhausted, and we still are gonna see that shortage, I think.
But, okay, so I guess,
No,
can
to answer your question
Oh, yeah,
directly,
yeah.
and I know Priscilla would support, basically, that fee would be the same, used the same way it always was, which to pay toward indebtedness.
okay,
It's sharing the cost of our infrastructure. Basically, what we have is, right now, is a Rochester Schools pump station. We built, in 2008.
Hmm.
And it was designed around a substantial flow from the water plant mostly.
Okay.
And right now, we've been awarded a grant through USDA, a loan grant package to replace the School Street pump station, which is shot. It's 40 years old.
And that's one, if you wanna see the impact Prime's wastewater had, take a tour of that facility.
And 80% of the town goes through that one pump station.
Exactly.
So to maintain service, that has to be done, well, for many other reasons. And for us to still provide or be a benefit to the town, that's what we have to do, and we're looking for a small fee.
Will this result in lower fees for users as a result of the way you're going to allocate?
But theoretically, it does, because we show it on the sheet as being it would lower the fee for the users, but as Jay just mentioned, we're dealing with the School Street station, and we envision by the time this sets in, and that one, and that project is undertaken, this is gonna actually be it'd be a net increase. This helps reduce, the sewer rate's not gonna go down $32 if we put the $39,000 in. It's not, because it's anticipated it's gonna go up again when we do the School Street station. It just won't go up as much because this stipend will help offset it.
One of the things that I asked when you had the meeting down at the plant was if there was any consideration of looking at the cost ratio of gallons of water used as part of the formula, or the formula, a percentage of that being the waste cost, your sewage fee. I understand there are some technical problems, as far as the technology is concerned, to get that information sort of transparent in the sense that it can be utilized. But I really sincerely think that it would be a more equitable way of charging sewer fees.
No, there's no question. We're gonna get there. Figuring out how to get information from Eunice to a form that we can use. I mean, it's a project that I've charged under it. The board has said we need to do it. At every meeting, when we talk about rates, it comes up. Most towns what he's talking about is everybody's billed based on how much water they use. So it's just a matter of translating the record somehow. Munis is a little different. We're just trying to figure out, what we gotta figure out is, can we get it to an Excel sheet? Because first, all we have to do is look at our accounts, how they're listed with the town and they're listed with us. Is there a way that we can match them up? Some people might have water and not sewer, and vice versa. So we have that.
It will get there.
We're getting there.
It's going in that direction. You're
I'm
absolutely right.
not saying it's a panacea for the operation of the plant. The only thing I'm saying is it is an alternative method of an equitable charge for a sewage fee compared to the water fee.
Yeah, absolutely. But, before, 91 was the last rate increase until 2009. It was 92.50 for that whole time. Until time before, then we had to up the rates. But with that big industrial contributor here, we all had a pretty good deal. The water department, the town, the sewer district, because we had Prime there. They were feeding everybody's budget.
When we set that rate increase back then, it lasted, 12 years? How many years did that last?
From 91 to 2009, so.
Yeah.
And
that's how long it
We
lasted.
were able to put some money in the bank and save for trying to expand or fix things when they broke apart. And boy, Prime's waste really speeds that up. But, and now we've got everything broken apart. And
the only question I had was, is there a more equitable way of a rate for the total user? For example, if you have a single person living in a single dwelling that probably uses very little water, they would be charged a percentage of that water fee, whatever that is. If it's 50% or 20%, that's immaterial. It's a method of making your system function, but also making a system that will be more equitable to the total population that's on the system.
We've seen it from
Yeah.
the beginning of time. It is, especially without prime, it's very evident, and it comes up
Yeah.
at all our open meetings, so we'll get there.
When is that gonna happen?
What's that, as far as working on it, we're working on it now. I mean, my next meeting is just to come meet with these guys to figure out, can we transport that information? If not, we have to maybe buy a program that does it, but just to take a look, see if
Yeah,
it's
okay.
feasible.
Can I follow up on the chairman's question? What happens to your rates if this isn't approved after the upgrade that you're talking about?
Well, it's basically,
It goes up, did we put that on here? It would increase it, they'll go up to between $590 to $600 a year to those rates.
I remember on the debate when this was all put in back, I hate to say back in 75, but I was around. And remember, the sewer district in Berwick is the whole town. It's not just us users. It is the whole town. And it is an asset to everybody in town, not just to us users either. So I've always supported that 39,000, and I remember, the debate at the time, 40 years ago, that when they put that in, that they felt as though that, where it was an asset, and people could put in their septic systems and everything into it, that 39,000 was not a lot for them to have to pay for half of the thing. And they were right. It went for many years and never was an argument. And then all of a sudden, in, I guess, 2008, when it was, somebody on the board decided that they didn't need any money.
Well, it seems like what they were trying to do is put the burden of the cost on the user base.
That's right.
Versus considering the whole town, the district.
But the whole town can vote. They can go out for $2 million, and the whole town can vote on it, but just us users are gonna pay for it.
Yeah,
I don't
how
think
it's
that's
set up. It's
fair.
like the water, I mean, really.
Is it your sense that people who are not hooked up to the water and sewer would just as soon remain not hooked up, or do you think that people view this as a positive thing? I mean, clearly, if you have an established residence, assuming that the well is working properly and your septic system is working properly, maintenance of that is much less expensive than the annual water and sewer fee. So, my sense is that the town folk that are not on the system currently don't really want to be on it.
you also have to look at, if the initial cost of a septic system, $10,000 to $15,000, and if you don't have that, you have just your connection to the sewer, it's not such a substantial outlay. As well, septic systems are finite. I mean, they generally all will fail in time.
When's the last time you expanded the reach of your system?
We didn't.
We really never have.
The first projects were to reconfigure the downtown area up to the Old Pine Hill Road, and it was done at the same time the water project was undertaken, where they redid all the water lines, and the philosophy we adopted back then was, let's dig a hole once. So if we were gonna dig up the street, we were gonna put in the water lines and then in the sewer lines, and we did that. The next project, to tell you the truth, was to extend the sewer line out Route 9 to the high school area, the old high school area, figuring that would be, the driver would be the need for a septic system upgrade that would, or an enlargement of the school. We heard a little bit of that tonight, but that project would have been the next one, and we've never done that because the need never arose. But you're not going to arbitrarily extend water and sewer lines unless you're trying to solve a problem, or you're trying to promote a new area. Good example is when York Hospital came in over by Dana's house, where we went up we went up Route 9, far enough so that they could get their facility access tied in. That's really the last sewer extension we did. And for the most part, it was picked up for by the developer in the developer's client.
But I'll have to say, being a person who had a septic system before the sewer went in, and living in town and, you know, not, well, where my apartment house is, that's only 41 feet, that piece of land. And believe me, the sewer was a welcome sight.
I mean, the Mary Dot situation out beyond the high school.
That's right.
Again, that was why the driver, we knew we had the potential for the schools needing more, and we had a problem area. The problem area fortunately took care of itself. But, the schools then just they relocated the Maine high school, and they're tied into the sewer over there. They're pumping, I don't know if you know that, but they are pumping from the school into the North Berwick system. So.
Yes, and I think the whole district paid for that.
I believe so.
Mr.
folks-
If I may, just point of clarification, just for my own education, other than anybody else's. If you went to expand the system and it was for an emergency purpose, that would have to be incurred by the town and the district as a whole. What I mean, like you just described about the Mary Dot, if in fact there was a recognized health issue there, we would have been obligated, the town as well as the district, to go ahead and extend that line out there and take care of it at that point. Other than that, the expansion of the district only occurs when there's development or something that's encouraging that to move on. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
You know, if I was gonna point out Tom's neighborhood down Key Road area on that big pocket of sand down there, if all of a sudden the water table becomes contaminated or you get a number of septic systems failed in one area, you'd have to build out to it to solve that situation.
I live there too.
And,
But I will say, that Mary Dot, that was just open sewerage. I was on the board at that time. That was a terrible situation.
Do folks who have septic systems pay a disposal fee when
Yes.
they do, there is a
And it's split two ways. Part of it, they actually pay the hauler, and the hauler pays the treatment fee, but he also gets the cost of him to transport it in the fee. And then I think some of the haulers even add a little additional stipend in if they have to dig it up and open up the tank area for access.
So about what is the cost?
It's 8 cents a gallon right now. It's an established rate for septic. If I have Steve Clifton at Underwood run that number, and the contents of septic through a formula, it's really not enough to pay for treating that.
Stronger waste.
It's fairly strong. It's very strong waste. That creates a lot of sludge and it costs us money. So we're treating it probably at.
I think the last time I had my tank pumped 2 years ago, I think it was $110. I think
128.
128 now.
Mine was 185 last summer.
Yeah.
Got a lot of crap in yours, huh?
I mean, it's a business for the haulers. I mean, they.
So
Sure, I was just wondering, you know, in terms of the concept, if you know, folks didn't have to pay for the disposal, if they would feel more comfortable, you know, contributing as, you know, voting for it if they're not an actual user, I guess was my question.
Returns from septic every year are very regular for us. It has been, at that 8 cents a gallon rate, it's been $40,000 for what we receive for tipping, you know, fees on septic. We're limited. We can't do any more than that. Basically, DEP says we can do 11,000 gallons a day. And for us to increase that rate, you know, try to make more money, it would be going against other towns that take it and we'd lose that business. To decrease it, like I said, already at 8 cents a gallon, if you run the characteristics of that waste through a cost formula, that would mean you'd be putting that cost on to the other users of the district, the people that are actually tied to the system, and treating everybody else as septic.
So your primary argument is that the entire town is the sewer district, and the original agreement was that half the debt service for the initial capital outlay was to be paid by the entire district for 40 years, and that was, I don't know, reneged is not the right word, but we changed that policy several years ago.
Yeah.
And that the entire sewer district benefits from particularly the high-density areas being on sewer, plus maintaining this high capacity that we have will help us attract business to the downtown area. So for all those reasons, you know, it seems like we should let the voters decide.
Absolutely, it's not ours to
It's something
decide.
they want to support again.
It's theirs.
Yes,
That's all right.
that's all we're asking, right?
I vote that we
Mr.
put it
O'Connor,
back on the warrant.
you're making a
Make a
motion?
motion that we put it back on the warrant.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to put the $39,000 sewer betterment fee for the entire sewer district on a warrant article for the town meeting. Any further discussion? Did we get a second?
Did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, all in favor? Okay, it's up to the voters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a short recess?
I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
We'll take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes?
Yep, thank you, sir.
I still think that